Andy Johnson, Minnesota State University. What's the deal with the science of reading questionable claims? Now, this is a recording of part of a podcast or a webinar, April 27th, 6 o'clock Central Standard Time, and hopefully you can join us there. This looks at part 2 of this webinar, 7 questionable science of reading claims. So let's get down to these questionable claims, and we should always question questionable claims. Questionable claim number 1, there is a crisis of reading achievement in the United States. Now, the data, we need to see some data if one is going to make a claim that bold. National Assessment of Educational Progress, that's part of the U.S. Department of Education. That's called the nation's report card. It does samples, representative samples of all the states in grades 4, 8, and 12. And you can see since 1971, scores have stayed the same or risen. 2008, I'll show you some more of this. In Minnesota, some legislators claim that we're below average, that reading is failing. And I said, well, show me the data. Well, they didn't show me the data. But here you can see the plus is the Minnesota data, and the circles is NAAP national data, and we are generally above the national average. So this idea that we're below average is just silly. And since 1992, 2015, our high in 2019, and we would expect during a pandemic when people are dying that there would be a little drop. Here's 2015 Minnesota and the nation. This is fourth graders, and you can see as a nation, okay, we're about here. All right, this is good, and we're back to where we were in 2019. Same with eighth graders. You see the scores since 92. Minnesota is above the national average. Now we're going to talk about these categories in a little bit, so just kind of hang on to that, what that is. And here you see this in graph form, or in table form, nationally since 1992, and we're about at the same place. We're at a high here, 2019. This is statistically significantly different, and we would expect during a pandemic in which everything is shut down and people are dying, we would expect there to be a slight dip in scores. And by the way, fluctuations in scores, it's natural. There's always going to be a natural fluctuation in scores. So you can't look at 1 year or 2 years, oh my gosh, where scores are going down. You always have to look at the long term to see where scores are in general. So there is no irrefutable proof that we are experiencing this national literacy crisis. It's a hysteria. They've created hysteria that this crisis exists, but it was not born out of good data. Here are 3 age groups from 71 to 2012. This is NAEP long-term trends in reading. Don't believe me, do a Google search and you will find it. But here are some of the sources I quoted as well. Now, we have to differentiate between norm reference tests and criterion reference tests when we make this case. A norm reference test compares students to a normal population. And here you have the natural bell-shaped curve. It shows you how far you are away from the mean. And we have percentile rankings, so you can make comparison from year to year and student to student. Oh yes, and it's good to be above the mean, not so good to be below the mean. But in any normal population, you're going to have 50% above average and 50% below average, or above the mean and below mean. That's what's called average. That's the mean. That's the mean, above and below average. A criterion reference test is an arbitrarily defined set of criteria. We think to be in 3rd grade, you must demonstrate mastery of these criteria. Now in Minnesota, we used MCAs, which are criterion reference tests based on a set of standards. what was in the test was arbitrarily defined, and the categories were arbitrarily defined. And we don't get actual scores in Minnesota, we get percentages of students in each category. We get that. But this criterion, you must pass this criterion. This is what third graders should know and be able to do. Who decides on the criteria? Who decides the categories and levels in each category? Who decides on the content of the criterion reference tests? These are arbitrarily defined decisions. And when you look in Minnesota at the standards upon which this criterion reference test was based, at least half of them are unrelated to any way that most adults use literacy in their real world. So, and that's the subject of another podcast, another video. But Minnesota has 4 arbitrarily defined categories, NAEP, national. These are norm reference categories. Both the levels and the categories were arbitrarily defined. Oh, we think third graders should know this. Boop. Oh, we think that is the basic level. We think that's the proficient level. We think that someone decided that. It's not based on statistics or mathematical average. And here are just some of my references there. Questionable claim number 2, and this is a good one. Lack of phonics instruction is the cause of all reading problems. It's the cause of the mythical reading crisis. Of all the possible variables impacting this mythical reading crisis, someone decided that phonics was the variable. Look at all the possible variables, but they said, nope, 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 none of that. It's phonics, darn it. Pardon my salty language. It's phonics. That's based on an ununderstanding. It's based on an I thinkism. If you are a science of reading, you can't be just a little bit science of reading. You have to come to conclusions based on solid data. And this idea, first, that there's this massive reading failure, that should be based on good data. And the same thing, of all the things impacting reading, it's phonics instruction. That is not science. I thinkism is not science. Anecdotal evidence is not science. Using data instead of research is not science. You can't be a little bit science of reading. All right, here's questionable claim number 3. The National Reading Panel provides irrefutable evidence that phonics instruction should be at the center of all reading instruction. Now, for those of you who don't know, the National Reading Panel is the most sciencey of all reading science. It was a panel put together in 2000. They examined over 100,000 applied research studies. These were studies conducted in classrooms using controlled and experimental research. The NRP members were experts in research methodology. That's one of the criteria used to select the members of the panel. And you've no doubt heard of the 5 pillars. Well, that came from this thing. They found what was effective in the classroom using applied research studies conducted in actual classrooms using controlled experimental research. All right, so let's take a look at some of the National Reading Panel findings related to phonics instruction. And I would recommend everyone read this report, not what someone says about it, not the executive summary, but dig into the report. There is some good stuff there. Dr. Timothy Shanahan was part of this, and there are some good stuff. It's nothing new or groundbreaking. It's what we have known for years and years in the International Literacy Association and the National Council of Teachers of English. But if you're going to use the National Reading Panel, you have to use all of it. So this is what they found related to phonics. Systematic phonics instruction is more effective in helping students read single words Out of context, well, that's phonics. We never, by the way, encounter single words floating in space. They are always in the context of a sentence, a sign, or a label. But if you teach phonics instruction, students are better able at using phonics instruction. Okay, to sound out single words and pseudo words, but that's not reading. But even if it is, it's more effective than unsystematic phonics or non-phonics instruction. And it doesn't tell us how much of the research looked at unsystematic phonics or non-phonics instruction. So if you teach something to one group and nothing to the other group, the something group is going to be better in measures of something than the nothing group does. Something always produces better results in something than nothing does. So systematic phonics instruction, that's essentially sounding out words out of context, absolutely. But does that transfer to authentic reading situations? Keep that question in mind. Let's take a look at the limited impacts, and this is taken directly from the report, chapter 2. The impact of phonics on comprehension is limited. There are mostly kindergarten and first grade students in the test, and they're reading single words, essentially comprehension focused on single sentences, most of it. So phonics on comprehension is limited. This isn't Andy saying that, National Reading Panel. Phonics instruction contributed only weakly, if at all, in helping poor readers apply these skills to read actual text. Poor readers actually apply these skills. You learn phonics over here, reading over there. Contributed weakly, if at all, to helping them in actual reading situations. But what do we do with poor readers? We give them more phonics instruction. And by the way, a struggling reader, there are 3 deficit areas: phonics, comprehension, and fluency. Struggling readers are not the same, but I'm getting ahead of myself a little bit. There was insufficient data to draw any conclusion about the effects of phonics instruction with normally developing readers above first grade. Now, everybody believes that phonics instruction is essential. Everybody does. It's not phonics or no phonics. It's how you teach phonics, how much you teach phonics, and when. And the National Reading Panel report says once they get to that first grade reading level, if you're a normally developing reader, you can reinforce phonics, but it's time to move on to other things. Phonics instruction fails to exert a statistically significant impact on poor readers in grades 2 through 6. And again, poor readers, what do? We slam phonics over their head. But that's not what the National Reading Panel report said. Interesting. If you're going to be a science of reading, you have to use all of the science. You can't ignore data. You can't use 1 or 2 studies. You have to look at a broad base of research to come to a conclusion. That's what science does. And the report says, most of us, when we think of phonics instruction, we think of synthetic phonics instruction, sounding out letters, putting the letters to form words. Synthesis, putting them together. But that's just one type of phonics instruction. Analytic phonics, embedded analogy phonics, onset rhyme, phonics through spelling, each of these were found to be equally effective. So this idea that you can only do synthetic phonics, analytic, analyzing words, phonics within the context of reading, that is not borne out by the National Reading Panel report. Each approach to phonics is equally effective. If I was in kindergarten and first grade, I would be doing a little bit of each because human beings are not standardized products. We are wonderfully and marvelously unique. Okay, this one is a good one. Questionable claim number 2. A balanced approach to literacy instruction does not include direct, systemic, and explicit phonics instruction, and we should not use it. It's a bad thing. Bad, bad, bad. And that again is based on I thinkisms. and anecdotal research, and an understanding of what balanced literacy is. Balanced literacy or balanced reading instruction is not a singular approach. It's not a method. It looks different in everyone's classroom. So let's get a sense of what it is. Phonics Space says balance says skills-based instruction must be balanced with experiences to practice those skills in authentic reading and writing context. There's a balance. Yes, we teach skills. We teach phonics. We teach other skills. But we also have a balance of chances for them to practice those skills in actual reading. They should actually be reading and writing. Now, one size does not fit all. There is no such thing as a one-size-fits-all curriculum. It's always on a continuum. There's a continuum from meaning-based, lots of reading and writing, skills-based, lots of skills instruction. With each class, depending on their needs, you're sliding back and forth here. No one exists hopefully, on one end of the continuum or the other. I'm guessing there may be a few real hardcore skills-based people, but with your students, it should always be a sliding continuum. Some students need less skills and more practice. Some students need more skills and less practice. When students are starting out, yes, you're going to be more here and less there. As they move along, you're going to hopefully, if you're doing your job, slide down there. Balanced literacy instruction looks a little bit different in every classroom. It's not a method. It's not an approach. It's not a program you can buy. You don't follow a set of instructions or a recipe with fidelity. It says that reading instruction should have a proper balance between these elements. Some students need a little more of one thing, a little less of the other thing, but all these things should be included. Now, there's the big five: comprehension, fluency, word identification, or phonics and phonemic awareness, vocabulary, all right? But these other things should be included as well. And balanced in literacy instruction, balanced reading instruction, this myth that we do not use direct instruction. That is wrong. We absolutely use direct, explicit, and systematic instruction to teach comprehension, to teach the cognitive processes related to comprehension. That is verbal reasoning, if you want to use Scarborough's rope, and also study skill strategies. We teach word identification, and I'm going to clarify the difference between identification and recognition. We teach word recognition strategies, phonics and phonemic awareness, vocabulary and writing, direct and explicit instruction in balanced literacy. Now, what does the National Reading Panel have to say about balanced literacy instruction or balanced reading instruction? This is going to blow your mind. Programs that focus too much on the teaching of letter-sound relations and not enough on putting them to use are unlikely to be effective. That's not Andy. That's the National Reading Panel report. Students need to apply their skills in daily reading every day and writing. Systematic phonics instruction should be integrated with other reading instruction to create a, wait for it, balanced reading program. That's not my words, that's the National Reading Panel. It should not become the dominant component of a reading program. Yep, that's not to say phonics is not important or essential. It's not the what, it's the how much, and it's the when, it's the for how long. Programs that focus too much on phonics with little time spent practicing are likely to be ineffective. And here is a direct quote, page 2-97, chapter 2, page 97. Systematic phonics instruction should be integrated with other reading instruction to create a balanced reading program, unquote. Phonics should not become the dominant component in any reading program, neither in the amount of time devoted to it, nor the significance attached. Again, chapter 2, page 97. All right, questionable claim number 3, and this is why it's important to understand science. This idea that there's a settled science of reading that has proven unequivocally to support phonics instruction as the key variable in determining the success and failure of reading. That just is not true. All right. Science is rarely settled or unequivocal. It does not prove things. Science is ever evolving, and reading science is no exception. That's why when you read research, they're rarely put in terms of irrefutable, proven, shows. Rather, it indicates. Research does not prove things, they support or don't support a hypothesis. And when they say it has been shown to work, research demonstrates that this works, you should always say, okay, it works for who? For what purpose? How? At what age? For how long? Phonics instruction works at developing phonics skills, especially for kindergarten and first grade. That does not mean you should universally have phonics instruction for all students all the time. For struggling readers in grade 6, 4, 3, look at what a body of research says. Phonics instruction is absolutely good for increasing phonics skills. But do these skills transfer to authentic reading situations? Do they persist? Do they enhance comprehension and motivation to read? At what age or level are they effective? Now, a lot of the science of reading, if you look at it, it's based on the simple view of reading. The idea that reading is merely sounding out words. And what happens then, sounding out words, it's a belief that poor readers are poor sounder outers, and that you need more sounding outer instruction. And if you start your research with the assumption that reading is sounding out words, you are going to ask sounding out word questions, you're going to use sounding out word treatment, and use sounding out word measures. But reading is more than sounding out words. Reading is creating meaning with print. Having that different understanding of reading changes the questions that are asked and the types of data that are collected and how that data are interpreted. And besides, struggling readers struggle in 1, 2, or 3 deficit areas. Some have deficits in just fluency, some in just word identification or recognition, and some in fluency. All right? Struggling readers are not all the same. There are 3 deficit areas. So depending on the reader, the emphasis in instruction should be on that deficit area. Questionable claim number 3. The cueing system is being used to teach children how to read, and it's a bad thing. I was at the Minnesota State Legislature, and I heard a legislator stand up and dismiss the cueing system. And I was thinking in my head, never have so many people known so little about so much. The cueing system is not an approach to teaching reading. The cueing system, or the 3 cueing system. If you're going to be against something, at least you should know what that something is. The cueing system is not a skill or a strategy that we teach. Boys and girls, here's a word, use the cueing system. That is not what the cueing system is. So understand this point, and I'll say it slowly. Cueing systems is a recognition that the brain uses integrated, interconnected systems to recognize words while reading. Recognizing words is different from identifying words, and we'll get to that in a minute. But all these systems work together to enable us to efficiently and effectively recognize words while reading. The phonological system, yes, we're using letter sounds to help us recognize words automatically. Semantics, that's meaning, the context. Syntactic, that's grammar or word order. The schematic system, that's the knowledge you have in your head, the top-down flow used to understand what you're reading. And a pattern recognition system. Sometimes that's called large unit phonics, but the brain naturally has evolved to recognize patterns. And I'll get a little bit more on this. But all of these work together. That's what cueing systems is. It's integrated word recognition systems that enable readers to quickly recognize words. And recognizing words is different from identifying words. This is why you need some knowledge in literacy to come to conclusions about literacy, to read research on literacy, even to do research. You need to know some background in order to identify questions and data. All right, recognizing words is different from identifying words. To recognize a word, it's in your lexicon. You see it in print and you automatically know what it is. Ah, I recognize you. It's automatic. That's what a skill is. You do it automatically. You're reading. I'm guessing most of you saw these words and you automatically knew what they were. You did not have to use a strategy. A word identification is a strategy. You see a word in print, you don't recognize it. It's in the dictionary in your head, your lexicon, but you need to use a strategy. You need to consciously employ. I don't recognize that word. I need to use a strategy. And there are 4 word recognition strategies. Phonics, or sounding out words, is one of them. Morphemic analysis, prefix, suffix, roots. A morpheme is a part of the word, the smallest unit of meaning within a word. Analogy, or large unit phonics, recognize word parts or patterns. Is there a part of this word that looks like a word that you know? And then phonics, I already said that, large unit phonics, and then semantics. What makes sense within the context of the sentence? Now we teach the strategy to develop the skill. By teaching these and practicing using direct and explicit instruction, eventually students engage in this cognitive process automatically, so they don't have to stop and sound out or use morphemes or analogies. We teach the strategy to develop the skill, and eventually they do it unconsciously. Okay, questionable claim number 7. And this another representative stood up there and said, with all the confidence in the world, I just shake my head. We look at every letter when we read. Good letters, good readers look at every letter. It's been proven. Okay, I thinkisms, but this simply is not what a body of research has showed us. When we read, our eyes move like hummingbirds. We don't read in a straight line from left to right. They make skips from word to word. These skips are called saccades. We also skip words, we repeat words, and we fixate on words. And we're going to bring a little more clarity to this. But we can only see that which our eyeballs fixate on. As a reading instructor, get used to watching the eyeballs of readers, especially if you're working in small groups. That tells you a lot. Now, a struggling reader goes letter by letter like this, and a good reader, their eyes move a little bit more slowly, and you can see them going back and forth. A fixation is where your eyeballs stop. Saccade is the little bit of the skip, and a regression is when you go back. And our eyes kind of go like this, not in a nice straight line. Expert readers use context clues to identify words. Absolutely. Because we don't fixate on every word. Expert readers skip over unrecognized words and come back. We often do this. That tells us, oh, we're coming back. We get a little information, clues from down there, and then we come back. I was working with a struggling 3rd grader, and she'd come to a word, she didn't know it, and she'd stop and she'd start sounding out every single letter, and she'd then make a guess. Large? So I gave her, I said, Sally, say blank and let your eyes look on both sides to see if you can find a clue. Sounding out, it would take her about 10 seconds. When she said blank, moved on, it would take her about 2. Now, I teach that as one strategy, not the only strategy. But yeah, there's times to skip the word and keep moving on. You and I do it all the time. Struggling readers go letter by letter, word by word, and they stop at unrecognized words. And we say to them, sound it out. Well, if they could sound it out, they wouldn't have stopped. So there's times to say, give it your best shot, or say blank and move on. If they're still creating meaning, that's good. Reading is not sounding out words, it's creating meaning with print. And word reading accuracy has been overemphasized. More on that later. But struggling readers assume that reading is sounding out words. And if they can't do that correctly, they're not good. So struggling readers will often sacrifice meaning. I'm not understanding, but I'm sounding it out correctly. And when they're doing round robin reading, they're more focused on correctly sounding out the word than creating meaning. Efficient readers will sacrifice word accuracy for meaning. That means when they're reading, they'll often insert words that mean the same thing as the word on the page. They're reading, instead of ran, they'll say run, but it still makes sense within the context of the sentence. That means they're reading for deep meaning versus surface structure. So yes, you must include phonics instruction. I'll say this again, because some people will say, that silly bald man says we shouldn't teach phonics. Yes, and phonics instruction must be included, plus activities to develop the other cueing systems. Now here's the thing. Other cueing systems, it's usually writing to develop grammar and word order, maze and close to develop semantics. You can still develop phonics within those contexts. So it's not an either or, it's all three. And why would you want to develop just 1/3 of the reading brain? Eventually, the eyes of struggling readers will look like non-struggling readers. They'll begin to move in a faster line, a smoother line. They'll jump over unrecognized words, and there'll be natural regressions. Here's an example of eye movement, one of the types of eye movement machines. So they actually look at students reading. This is an example of basic research, the importance to help us understand what's happening. Now, perceiving with our eyes. The environment doesn't give us all the information we need to make sense of the world. We get partial data, but our brain is filling in the blanks. 10 times more information is flowing down than flowing up. So I don't need all the information. If I'm in the woods and hear a growl and see a big dark shape and movement, I don't need all the information to say, oh, bear. My brain is filling in the blanks. I'm using knowledge plus other clues. And when we read, our eyes do not maintain a steady gaze. Moves around like a hummingbird. For example, if you think I'm lying to you, keep your eyeballs on the O without moving them, and you'll notice all the letters on the periphery begin to fold. But if your eyeballs begin to kind of move around a little bit, well, then it's clear. Our eyeballs, they take little tiny snapshots, and then the brain fills in the blanks. Take a look at this picture. Where do your eyes move? You think you're looking just at that picture, but as you look at this picture, notice where your eyeballs move. Eye movement research shows, oh, they're going like this. They're taking little snapshots, and eventually this composite picture is built up in our brain based on the little snapshots. Next time you're driving down the highway, you think you're staring straight ahead, but notice how your eyes are going like this. Taking little snapshots, filling in the blanks, and you create this whole picture. And it seems like your eyes are straight ahead. The same with reading. It seems like you're going in a straight line and perceiving every letter, but your brain is filling in the blanks. Again, saccades are the skips, regressions are going back, fixations are where your eye stops. We have 3 regions. The foveals, that's the only part that can see clearly. 3 to 6 letters at about the size of a grape at arm's length. Foveal, we can see a little bit more, but not very clearly at all. And periphery, things are mostly fuzzy there. We can hardly see it all. 8 to 14, all else is peripheral. And here's an example. We see a little bit more ahead, less behind, and this is the only part that sees clearly. This is an example of what foveal, parafoveal, and peripheral would look like if you're looking straight ahead, but we don't do that. Our eyes are moving, taking pictures, so it seems like we're seeing the whole picture. But the research is quite clear. 20 to 30% of the words are skipped while reading. We go right over them. Our brain tricks us into think we're seeing every word. We're filling in the blanks. We tend to skip more function words. These are words like and, in, of, serve a grammatical function, and fewer content words, words that create meaning. And of course, with familiar text, and subjects, we skip more words. Unfamiliar, we skip fewer words. Brain imaging research shows that 10 times more information is flowing from the cortex down to the thalamus than from the thalamus up when we're reading. We're using the information in our head. That's the schematic system or knowledge system. Patterns helps us see or recognize patterns. This is this Gestalt, this natural inclination to fill in the blanks, to see the whole picture. Here, most people see either a saxophone player or a guy wearing a hat. But that's not the complete information. Our brain is filling in the blanks, either a tree or a gorilla and a leopard or a panther of some sort. Our brain is filling in the blanks, either a cup or two people face to face. Our brain is filling in the blanks. That's called Gestalt. Expert readers use minimal letter clues. Top-down information. Don't be sold a story by I thinkists. Anecdotal evidence. Emily Hanford is a marvelous radio documentary person. I am sure she's a marvelous person too. But she's not a literacy expert. She's selling you a story about this mythical reading crisis, and it's caused by not teaching enough phonics. And those things sadly make good radio drama, good TV, sell copies at the expense of our struggling readers.